Find a comfortable position. Let your body sink into whatever is beneath you. Feel the weight of your arms, your legs, your chest, all of it heavy, warm, still. Take a slow breath in. Hold it for just a moment and let it go. Again, breathe in and out. With every breath you take, the world you left today grows further away. The noise of it, the urgency of it, the weight of it, all of it drifting like smoke dissolving into a night sky. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to solve. Just this moment, just this darkness, just this story. Tonight I'm going to take you somewhere ancient, somewhere that exists in the space between the living world and the one beneath it. A world of impossible flowers and eternal darkness, of gods who fell in love in the most unlikely of places, and of a story that explains why winter comes and why spring always returns. This is the story of Hades and Persephone. Close your eyes. Let your breath slow and follow me back. Back to the very beginning, to a time when the world was young and the gods were still learning what it meant to rule it. To a place called Greece. To a mountain called Olympus. To a family of gods so vast and complicated and full of feeling that their stories have never stopped being told. Before we meet Persephone, we must understand the world she was born into. When the universe was first divided, 3 brothers drew lots to decide who would rule what. Zeus drew the sky, Poseidon drew the sea, and Hades drew the underworld, the realm beneath all things, the place where the dead go when the living world is done with them. Some say Hades was unlucky. Some say the underworld was the least desirable of the 3 realms. Too dark, too silent, too far from the light of the sun. But Hades did not see it this way. He saw a kingdom, vast and orderly and permanent in a way that the living world could never be. The living world changed constantly. Seasons shifted. Empires rose and fell. Mountains crumbled into the sea over millennia. But the underworld was eternal. The dead, once arrived, stayed. The rivers that flowed through it, the Styx, the Lethe, the Phlegethon, flowed without end. The fields of Asphodel, where ordinary souls wandered, stretched on forever in every direction. The palace of Hades rose from black stone at the center of it all, vast and silent and perfectly still. And Hades ruled it alone, for a very long time. He was not cruel, despite what the living said about him. He was not evil, despite the fear his name inspired. He was simply separate, from the warmth of Olympus, from the noise of the living world above, from everything that moved and changed and grew. He sat on his black throne in his silent palace, and he ruled. And he was alone. Let that feeling of deep quiet settle into you now. The quiet of a place far below the noise of everything, where nothing is required of you, where you can simply be still, breathe, and rest, far above the underworld, above the rivers of the dead and the fields of wandering souls and the black stone palace, above the living earth with its cities and its oceans and its endlessly turning seasons, on the highest peak of Mount Olympus where the air was too thin for mortals to breathe, lived the gods, and among them, perhaps the most beloved of all, was Demeter, goddess of the harvest, goddess of grain and growing things, of the first green shoots pushing up through dark soil in early spring, of golden wheat fields under a late summer sun, of the smell of earth after rain. Demeter was warmth itself, She moved through the world the way sunlight moves through leaves, gently, generously, touching everything she passed and leaving it more alive than before. The ancient Greeks loved her above almost any other god, because without Demeter, nothing grew. Without her blessing, the seed stayed dormant in the cold ground. Without her attention, the harvest failed. Without her, there was no bread, no fruit, no life. She knew this, and she took her responsibility seriously. She walked the earth in the form of a mortal woman, moving through fields and farmlands, touching the soil, blessing the seeds, guiding the seasons with steady and patient hands. She had one daughter, Persephone, and she loved her the way the earth loves water, completely, desperately, without reservation. Persephone had been born from a union between Demeter and Zeus himself, which made her something extraordinary, a goddess of spring, of new growth, of the first flowers that push through the last of the winter snow. She had her mother's warmth and her father's light and something entirely her own. A kind of joy that was so natural and unself-conscious that it made everything around her bloom. Where Persephone walked, flowers opened, not because of any deliberate magic, but simply because joy, when it is genuine and unguarded, has that effect on the world. She was young as the gods measured youth, still discovering what she was capable of, still learning the shape of her own power. She spent her days in the meadows of Sicily, a place so green and soft and full of flowers that even the gods came there sometimes just to sit and breathe. She had companions, the daughters of gods and nymphs and ocean spirits, and they would spend whole golden afternoons moving through the meadows together, gathering flowers, laughing at nothing in particular, existing in that specific kind of happiness that comes before you understand how rare it is. The meadow was full of narcissus and hyacinth and asphodel, and on certain mornings when the light was very still, it was the most beautiful place in the world. Demeter watched her from a careful distance. She always watched. She had always been careful with Persephone, perhaps because she understood, in the way that only mothers understand certain things, that beauty and joy attract attention, that the things we love most are the things we are most afraid to lose. She had kept Persephone close, closer than Persephone sometimes wanted to be kept. But Demeter was not wrong to be careful. She simply could not have known from which direction the danger would come. Let the warmth of the meadow settle around you now. The smell of flowers on a warm afternoon. The sound of soft laughter in the distance. The feeling of golden light on your closed eyelids. Breathe and drift. It was on an ordinary afternoon in the meadow of Sicily. The kind of afternoon that feels like it will last forever. Warm, still, full of the quiet sound of bees moving between flowers. Persephone had wandered slightly apart from her companions. Not far, just a little further into the meadow than usual, she had seen something, a flower she had never seen before. It grew alone apart from the others, in a small clearing in the grass. A narcissus, but unlike any narcissus she had ever seen. It had 100 blooms on a single stem. Its fragrance was unlike anything in the world above or below, sweet and dark and deep in a way that made her feel slightly dizzy. She reached for it, the moment her fingers closed around the stem. The earth opened, not violently, not with a great crash of thunder or a splitting of rock, but simply opened. the way a door opens when someone on the other side has been waiting for a long time. A darkness rose from below, and from that darkness came a chariot, black horses, 4 of them, moving like shadows given form, and driving them. A figure, tall, still, wearing a crown of dark metal that caught no light. Hades. He had seen her before. From below, through the cracks in the earth where light sometimes fell through. He had watched her in the meadow on those golden afternoons, had watched the flowers open where she walked, had felt something he had no name for. Having spent so long in a kingdom where feeling was not required of him, he had gone to Zeus. He had done what was proper. He had asked. Zeus had said neither yes nor no, which gods of his particular power often did when they did not want to be held responsible for what came next. And so Hades had made a decision. He reached down from the chariot and took her. Persephone cried out. The sound of it scattered the birds from the trees at the edge of the meadow. Her companions turned, saw the darkness, saw the earth closing, and ran. And the earth closed behind the chariot, and the meadow was quiet again, as if nothing had happened, as if the afternoon had simply continued. The flowers still bloomed. The bees still moved between them. The light was still warm and golden. But Persephone was gone. Down through the roots of things. Down through the dark between layers of rock and soil, an ancient compressed time. Down past the rivers that mortals had never seen. Down through the sound of the world slowly fading above her. Until there was no sound from above at all. Only the darkness, only the chariot, only the figure beside her who had not spoken a single word, and the slow realization of where she was being taken. Let the darkness be soft around you now. Not frightening, just deep, just quiet. The way darkness feels when you are safe inside it. Breathe and rest. The underworld was nothing like she had imagined. She had grown up hearing about it, of course. Every god knew of the realm below, the place the dead went, the place ruled by the silent brother of Zeus. She had imagined something like a cave, dark, cold, small. What she found instead was vast, impossibly vast. The chariot moved through it, and she could not see the edges of it in any direction. The ceiling above was so high it disappeared into darkness. The ground below stretched on without horizon. Rivers moved through it in slow silver and black curves. The Styx, whose waters were so sacred that even the gods swore oaths by them. The Lethe, the river of forgetting, whose surface was perfectly still and perfectly dark. The Phlegethon, river of fire, that burned without consuming. The Acheron, river of woe, that carried the newly dead from the living world to this one. And between the rivers, fields. The fields of Asphodel, where the ordinary dead wandered in a gentle, dreamless state. The Elysian fields, where the heroic and virtuous dead lived in something very close to happiness. And in the distance, the black stone palace of Hades. It was enormous. Its towers rose into the darkness above. Its gates were made of iron and bronze and something else, something that had no name. Persephone looked at all of it without speaking. She was frightened. She would not pretend otherwise, not even to herself. But she was also, in some small and complicated way, she didn't want to examine too closely. Astonished, the chariot stopped before the palace gates. Hades stepped down. He offered her his hand. She did not take it. She stepped down on her own. He did not seem surprised by this. He led her through the gates. through corridors of black stone lit by torches that burned with cold blue flame. Past rooms she glimpsed through open doorways and could not fully understand. Into a hall at the center of the palace where two thrones stood on a raised platform. One was black iron. One was different. Silver and dark wood and woven with flowers that should not have been able to grow here, but were. Small pale flowers, quietly blooming in the dark. Hades gestured to the silver throne. Persephone stood very still and looked at him for the first time directly. He was not what she had expected. She had expected something monstrous. What she saw was someone tired. Someone who had been alone for a very long time. Someone who did not entirely know what to do now that he had done this thing he had done. She did not sit, not yet. But she looked at the throne with its impossible pale flowers, and she felt something shift very slightly inside her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of curiosity, which is sometimes how the most important things begin. Let curiosity be gentle in you now. The soft opening of a door you weren't sure you wanted to open. No need to go through it yet, just notice it's there. Breathe and rest. Above the earth, Demeter had noticed. She always noticed. She had felt it the moment it happened, not through sight, not through sound, through something deeper than either. The specific cold knowledge that moves through a mother when something has happened to her child. She came to the meadow first, found it empty, found the place in the grass where something had been disturbed, found a single narcissus, broken at the stem, lying on the ground. She called Persephone's name. The meadow did not answer. She called again. Silence. She searched for hours, moving across Sicily in increasingly desperate circles. She questioned the nymphs who had been Persephone's companions. They told her what they had seen. The darkness, the chariot, the earth closing, and then they fell silent because there was nothing more to say. Demeter understood. She understood who had done this. She understood where her daughter had been taken. And something in her, something that had always been warm and generous and open, closed, like a flower when the sun goes down. She did not go to Zeus first. She knew what Zeus would say. She knew he had known. She could feel it in the way the sky looked when she turned her eyes upward. That particular quality of light that meant her brother was not looking back. Instead, she did something no one had ever seen her do. She let go of the earth. She stopped tending it. She stopped blessing the seeds. She stopped guiding the seasons with her patient hands. She simply stopped and walked. She walked across the earth in the form of an old mortal woman, dressed in dark robes, carrying a torch, searching for her daughter. Day became, night became, day became night. She did not stop walking. She did not eat. She did not rest. She wandered through cities and across mountains and along coastlines and through forests. And behind her, the earth began to change. The crops in the field stopped growing. The seeds in the ground stopped responding. The fruit on the trees dried and fell and was not replaced. At first, the mortals didn't understand what was happening. Then they began to go hungry. Then they began to starve. The animals grew thin. The rivers ran lower. The soil cracked and hardened and refused to accept new seeds. And still Demeter walked, her torch burning through the long, cold nights. Her face set in an expression that had no name. Not grief exactly, not rage exactly. Something older than either. something that only exists in the space between losing someone and not yet knowing whether you will ever find them again. She walked for 9 days, 9 nights, without rest, without comfort, without any sign. Let the stillness of that searching come to you now. Not the pain of it, but the quiet beneath it. The way the world looks at night when you have been walking for a long time. The way a torch looks in the dark when everything else is still. Breathe and rest. Below the earth, time moved differently. In the underworld, there was no sun to mark the hours, no seasons to mark the months, only the steady, unchanging quality of the dark. Persephone had not eaten. This was important, though she didn't fully understand why yet. There was a rule, ancient and absolute, that governed the underworld. Anyone who ate the food of the dead belonged to it. She did not know if Hades knew she knew this. She suspected he did. She also suspected, from the way food appeared in her rooms each day and was quietly removed each day untouched, that he was not going to force the issue. He had given her rooms in the palace, large rooms, by the standards of the underworld, with walls of smooth, dark stone and furniture of black wood and silver. And flowers. He had somehow arranged for flowers. She didn't know how. Nothing grew here naturally. But each morning, or what passed for morning in a place without a sun, there were fresh flowers in her rooms. Narcissus, asphodel, pale roses she had never seen before. She did not thank him for them, but she did not remove them either. She explored the palace in the early days, carefully, methodically, the way she had always approached new things. She found the throne room, the great gates, the corridors that led to the rivers. She found the hall where Hades judged the dead, sitting very still on his iron throne, while the souls of the recently departed stood before him, and their lives were assessed and their destinations assigned. She watched him work from a doorway once, unseen. He was different in that hall than he was anywhere else. Completely focused, completely present. He asked questions of the souls before him that were surprisingly gentle. He listened to their answers with complete attention. His judgments were not cruel. They were precise. She had expected a tyrant. What she found was something more like a judge, one who took his work very seriously, one who understood that what happened in that hall mattered more than almost anything else in the universe. She began reluctantly to respect this. She was still angry. She was still afraid. She still missed her mother with an ache that was physical, that lived in her chest and did not go away. She missed the meadow. She missed the sun. She missed the smell of growing things and the sound of her companions laughing. But she was also beginning to see the underworld more clearly. And it was not entirely what she had thought it was. One evening, Hades found her sitting by the river Styx. She was watching the souls of the newly dead arrive on Charon's boat. He sat beside her, not close, a careful distance away. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she said without looking at him, "Why did you do it this way?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I did not know another way." She turned to look at him then, and he met her gaze steadily, without flinching, without looking away. And she understood something she had not expected to understand. He was telling the truth. Let that truth settle quietly around you now. The truth of someone who has lived so long in silence that they have forgotten how to ask for what they need. Breathe and rest. On the 10th day of her searching, Demeter came to a place called Eleusis, a small city on the coast of Greece. She was exhausted in a way that even a goddess could be exhausted. Not physically. Goddesses do not tire physically. But something deeper. A weariness of the heart that comes from grief without resolution. She sat at a well outside the city walls. An old woman in dark robes with a torch that had long since burned out. The daughters of the king of Eleusis found her there. They did not know she was a goddess. They saw only an old woman sitting alone at a well, looking like someone who had been walking for a very long time. They brought her water. They brought her food. They spoke to her gently. And something in Demeter, something that had been completely closed for 10 days, opened slightly. She accepted the water. She went with them to their father's palace. She sat in the great hall, and the king and his wife treated her with kindness. They gave her a place to rest. They gave her food, which she did not eat, but accepted gracefully. And the queen placed her infant son in Demeter's arms. The baby looked up at her and laughed. Something cracked open in Demeter's chest. She held the child through the night. She did not cry. Goddesses rarely cry. But she sat with that laughing infant in the dark of a mortal palace, and she felt, for the first time in 10 days, something other than grief. She felt the specific tenderness that comes from holding something small and alive and completely trusting. In gratitude for the family's kindness, she decided to make the child immortal. She began the ritual, anointing him with ambrosia, breathing divine breath over him, placing him in the fire each night to burn away his mortality. But the queen discovered this and screamed in terror, and the ritual was broken. Demeter revealed herself. The palace shook, the family knelt, and Demeter, standing in her full divine form with her grief and her power radiating from her like heat from a flame, made her demands known. "Build me a temple," she said, "and I will tell you the mysteries of life and death and the growing of things." They built it, and she sat in it, and she continued to let the earth die. Above the earth, the gods of Olympus were beginning to panic. The mortals were starving, and starving mortals do not make offerings to the gods, and gods without offerings grow weak. Zeus sent messenger after messenger to Demeter. She refused to see them. He sent Iris with a rainbow. She ignored it. He sent Hermes with promises. She sat in her temple and did not come out. Finally, Zeus understood that this was not a disagreement that could be managed or negotiated or smoothed over. This was a mother, and she would let the entire world die before she stopped. He called Hermes to him. "Go to the underworld," he said. "Bring Persephone back. Let that resolve move through you now. The resolve that comes when something important has been decided. When the waiting is finally over. Breathe and rest." Hermes descended, quick-footed, golden-winged, moving through the layers of the world the way only the messenger of the gods could move. Past the living earth, past the roots of mountains, past the ancient compressed darkness between the world above and the world below, into the underworld. He found Hades in the throne room, delivered Zeus's message. Hades was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. He went to find Persephone. She was in the garden he had made for her at the center of the palace, a small space, not large, but he had worked to fill it with everything that could grow in the dark. Pale flowers, dark moss, small trees with silver leaves that moved in a wind that came from nowhere. She spent time there every day. He found her standing beneath one of the silver-leaf trees, looking up at its branches. He told her she could go. She turned to look at him, and he saw something on her face that he hadn't expected. Something complicated. She had been waiting to go home since the moment she arrived. She had not eaten. She had held on to that rule like a rope. She was going home. And yet, the look on her face was not simple joy. It was more complicated than that. She had been here long enough to understand the underworld in ways she hadn't when she arrived. Long enough to have walked its paths and sat by its rivers and watched the dead arrive and be sorted with surprising care. Long enough to have had conversations with Hades by the Styx that had lasted hours. Long enough to have stopped seeing him as only the figure who had taken her, and begun seeing him as something else. Something she didn't have a word for yet. She was going home. She held on to that. She turned back toward the palace to prepare to leave. And then she made a decision. Later, she would not be entirely sure why she made it. Perhaps she was hungry after so long without eating. Perhaps it was something she had been offered and not taken, and the offer had stayed with her. Perhaps it was something more complicated than either. She stopped. She turned to one of the pomegranate trees in the garden. The fruit was dark and heavy and gleamed like something precious. She reached up, took one, split it open, and ate 6 seeds. Just 6. Small and red and sweet in a way that surprised her. She did not think about what she was doing, or perhaps she did. Perhaps that is exactly what she was doing. Hermes appeared in the garden doorway. He saw what she had done. His expression shifted, just slightly. She met his eyes, and something passed between them that was not quite a smile, and not quite an acknowledgement, but was somewhere between both. She set down the pomegranate and walked toward the gate. Let that decision settle into the quiet around you now. The weight of a small choice that changes everything. 6 seeds and a world transformed. Breathe and rest. The reunion between Persephone and Demeter happened on the plain of Eleusis. Hermes brought Persephone up through the earth in the chariot. The same black horses, the same darkness rising, but this time she was going in the other direction, and the feeling was entirely different. When the earth opened above her and the light came through, the actual light of the actual sun, she had forgotten. In the underworld there was light, cold blue torchlight, the glow of the rivers, the pale gleam of asphodel flowers. But not this, not the warm pressing gold of actual sunlight. It fell on her face like something she had been thirsty for without knowing it. She stood in the chariot and turned her face upward and simply breathed. And across the plain, moving fast with the specific speed of someone who has been waiting too long, Demeter came. She was still in her old woman's disguise, but she dropped it without thinking as she ran. She was radiant. She was terrifying. She was the most purely feeling thing Persephone had ever seen. They held each other for a long time. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that wasn't already being said by the fact of being together. Around them, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the earth began to respond. A shoot of green appeared in the cracked brown soil. Then another. Then a small spray of wildflowers at the edge of the plain. Then more. The warmth in the air shifted. Not much, just slightly. But enough. Enough to feel like the beginning of something. Demeter held her daughter's face in her hands and looked at her. Really looked. And she saw something, a change that had not been there before. Not a bad change, not something that diminished her, but a depth that hadn't been there. A knowing, a gravity, as if the time below had added something to her, rather than taken something away. And then Demeter asked the question she had been afraid to ask. Did you eat? Persephone met her mother's eyes and told her the truth. 6 seeds. Demeter was very still. For a long moment the plain was completely silent. Then she pulled her daughter close again and held her and wept, not from despair, but from something more complicated. The grief of a mother who understands that her daughter has become something she cannot fully protect anymore. Something that exists in 2 worlds now. Something that has chosen, in some small, irreversible way, to be partly elsewhere. The green kept spreading across the plain, slowly, steadily, the way spring always comes, not all at once, but inevitably. Let that spreading warmth come to you now. The green of things returning, the slow arrival of something that has been away. Breathe and rest. The matter was brought before Zeus, as all things eventually were. The rule was ancient and absolute. Anyone who ate the food of the dead belonged to the underworld. But Persephone was a goddess, and only 6 seeds, and the earth was still half dead, and Demeter was standing in Zeus's hall with an expression that made even the king of the gods choose his words carefully. Zeus considered, he consulted, he deliberated. He did what powerful figures do when they are caught between 2 things they cannot afford to lose. He found a compromise. 6 seeds, 6 months. For 6 months of every year, Persephone would return to the underworld, to the black stone palace, to the silver throne, to Hades who was waiting. For the other 6 months, she would return to the living world, to her mother, to the meadows, to the sun. Demeter accepted this. She did not like it. She would never entirely like it. But she accepted it, because there was truth in it. The truth of a daughter who is no longer entirely her mother's, who has gone somewhere and come back changed, who belongs now to 2 worlds, as so many of us do. The announcement was made, the seasons were established. When Persephone descends, Demeter grieves. The earth grows cold. The crops stop growing. The days shorten and the light thins, and the world turns inward. This is winter. When Persephone returns, Demeter rejoices. The seeds wake, the flowers push through the last of the snow. The days lengthen, the warmth comes back. This is spring, every year, without fail. The same grief, the same joy, the same turning. As long as the earth exists, the ancient Greeks looked at the seasons and saw a mother's love. They looked at the first flower of spring and saw a daughter coming home. They looked at the first frost of autumn and felt something move through them that they could not quite name. The world made sense in a way it hadn't before. Not because it was fair. It wasn't fair. It was never entirely fair. But because it had a reason. And reasons, even difficult ones, even ones that involve loss, are a kind of comfort. Let that settling come to you now. The comfort of things that have a reason, even the difficult ones, even the ones that come with loss. Breathe and rest. There is something the ancient stories do not always tell you. What happened when Persephone returned to the underworld that first time? Not taken, not stolen, but returning on her own feet, by her own choice. She came back in autumn when the light above was just beginning to thin. and the leaves were just beginning to turn, and the air had that specific quality of something preparing for rest. She descended through the earth. The darkness rose around her. The living world faded above, and the underworld opened below. The rivers, the fields, the black stone palace. Hades was at the gate. He had not sent a chariot this time. He had not sent anything. He had simply waited. She walked through the gate herself. He said nothing. She said nothing. They walked together through the palace corridors, into the garden where the pale flowers grew, and sat in the specific quiet of the underworld, which is unlike any other quiet in the world. The quiet of a place where nothing is required, where nothing is growing towards something, where nothing is urgently becoming, just existing. She had missed it. She had not expected to miss it, but she had. The meadow was beautiful. Her mother's warmth was irreplaceable. But there was something here too, something the living world, with all its noise and growth and urgency, could not provide. A stillness, a depth, the feeling of being somewhere ancient and permanent and completely unhurried. She sat with Hades in the garden. The silver-leaf trees moved in their sourceless wind. The pale flowers bloomed, and Hades said very quietly, "I am glad you came back." She looked at him, and something in her that had been partly closed since the beginning opened. Not all the way, not yet, but enough. She said, "I know." They sat together in the quiet of the underworld, and the seasons continued above them. Autumn deepening into winter, the earth resting under Demeter's grief, the seeds waiting in the dark ground for a warmth that would come. As it always came, as it always would. Let the quiet of this garden come to you now. The specific peace of a place that is deep and still and permanent, where nothing is required of you, where you can simply exist, breathe, and rest. And so ends the story of Hades and Persephone. Or rather, it doesn't end. That is the point. It is a story that repeats every year, without exception. The descent, the search, the reunion, the return, winter, spring, summer, autumn, around and around, as long as the earth turns. The ancient Greeks looked at this cycle and found in it something deeply true about life. That loss and return are not opposites. They are partners. That the things we love leaving us is the same force that brings them back. That winter is not the absence of spring. Winter is what makes spring feel like what it is. That the grief of losing something and the joy of getting it back are part of the same experience. You cannot fully have one without the other. Persephone understood this in a way she could not have before she was taken. She understood that she was not simply a goddess of spring. She was a goddess of both worlds, of flowers, and of the dark earth beneath them, of the meadow and the underworld, of the warmth of her mother and the quiet of her husband, of above and below. She moved between them with a fluency that no other god possessed, and because of that, she understood something no one else quite could, that the world is not divided into dark and light, into good and terrible, into loss and abundance. It is all of it together, always. The meadow contains the darkness beneath it. The darkness contains the seeds of the meadow. You cannot separate them. You were never supposed to. And perhaps that is why this story has been told for thousands of years. Not because it is a love story, though it is. Not because it explains the seasons, though it does. But because it tells the truth about something most of us feel but cannot quite articulate. That we too live in two worlds, the bright surface world of doing and becoming and achieving, and the dark world beneath it, the world of rest, of quiet, of the self that exists when no one is watching and nothing is required. Both are real, both are necessary, both are home. And now it is very late. The story is finished. The underworld is quiet. The palace of Hades is still. Persephone is in her garden with its pale flowers and silver trees. And Demeter is above the earth, watching the stars, counting the days until spring. And you are here, in the warmth, in the dark, in the quiet that comes after a long story. Your body is heavy, your breath is slow. Your thoughts have drifted far from where they were when this began. There is nothing left to carry, nothing left to figure out, nothing left to do. Just this breath, in and out, in and out. The seeds are resting in the dark ground. The rivers of the underworld are flowing. The pale flowers are blooming in a garden beneath the earth. And you are resting too. Exactly as you should be, exactly where you need to be. Good night.